Hello, I'm David Morris. President Biden has promised $7 billion over the next 20 years to 100,000 people. Pretty lucky 100,000 people, right? Why are they so important? Well, they're an important 100,000 people because they live in Micronesia. And many people I've found have not heard of Micronesia. Is it in Africa? Where is it? Well, it's very important because actually Micronesia is 3 states that are spread across the central Pacific. So they're across the Pacific Ocean and they're very large in the area of sea that they control. Actually, in total, the Micronesian states are equivalent to the continental United States. And so that means they're geopolitically important. They're important because they either recognize Taiwan or they recognize China, so they're important to China, and they're particularly important to the United States because the US has a big military base in Guam, which is also in Micronesia but is still a US colony, and these 3 semi-independent countries that I want to talk about for a moment, Federated States of Micronesia, Palau and the Marshall Islands, are important because while they were decolonized by the US, they still have compacts of free association, and those agreements that they've just renegotiated require the US to fund a whole lot of operations, a whole lot of support for these countries. They provide access to the US, visa-free access for Micronesians. Micronesians can serve in the US military. And of course, most importantly for the US maintains essentially defence and foreign policy control of this large part of the Pacific. So actually these agreements are pretty important to Australians, to Chinese, to Americans, and to anyone who lives in the neighbourhood of the Pacific. So 100,000 people it might be, but a very strategically important part of the world. I had the great privilege of visiting Yap, which is one of the tiny islands, part of the Federated States of Micronesia, a few years ago. Met some wonderful people, saw fabulous cultural performances. I could see that they're proud of their culture, that culture is surviving. But I could also see and heard from people of the island that they've lost some of their traditional practices of fishing and being self-reliant. So there's a vicious circle here. They're too aid dependent, but yet they want to negotiate that aid from the US. So it'll be very interesting to see if this bill gets through Congress to actually support these states, and how can they develop and how can they play this geopolitical game where they essentially are under the umbrella of the United States, but like all of us, they're wanting to trade and benefit from relations with China as well. So they'll be interesting places to keep a note of in the future.